Welcome to the Authority File, the podcast where you'll hear conversations with academic librarians, technologists, researchers, and authors whose work is laying the foundation for higher education's future. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. In this series, our guests discuss the intersection of generative AI and critical thinking, posing the crucial question, does Gen AI help critical thinking or erode it? The general takeaway is a positive one, although there are many factors that must be established before we get to that point. And we not only examine AI's potential impact on critical thinking, but our guests apply their own critical thinking on how AI can be effectively frameworked, deployed, and used in higher education and scholarly publishing. And during this 4-part series, which is brought to you with support from Sage, we'll supplement our theorizing with tactical ideas for ensuring critical thinking is preserved and enhanced during the use of Gen AI. Joining me are the author and tech philosopher Dr. Tom Chatfield, Dr. Leo Lowe, Dean and Professor of the College of University Libraries and Learning Services at the University of New Mexico, and Katie Metzler, Vice President of Books and Social Science Innovation at Sage. In this second episode, we discuss tactical approaches to effectively understanding and using generative AI in ways that preserve our critical thinking skills. I'd like to sort of get into sort of the more tactical and practical uses of AI in a higher education context. And I think we've generally moved on from attempting to ban the use of Gen AI in higher education, but we still need to make sure educators fully understand what it is before we can help them effectively incorporate it into instruction. I'm wondering if that is a fair statement, and if so, what are the general steps needed to make that happen? Leo, why don't we go over to you to start that?
I think we're moving on. I don't think we've moved on. I think
We're still
have
doing
a
it.
lot. Yeah, I think there are a lot of. It's a wide spectrum of opinions and thoughts on this, and that's why having AI literacy, helping people learn a little bit more about the technology and its uses and its issues, can help them make that decision on whether they want to ban it or not. It's up to them. I mean, they do have academic freedom in their own classrooms to do what they want, whatever they think is best for their students. So, but I think we're moving on. At the same time, teaching people, giving them opportunities to have some hands-on experience on using these tools, to let them see what it can do, what it cannot do, can be really, really helpful. And at the same time, understanding a little bit of the technological kind of the technical aspect of it behind all of it. It's a statistical model, therefore it's like this. And so they can learn a little bit more how to interact with these. And at the same time, that means they can help the students learn to interact with these. And once they know a little bit more about the tool, just as they learn a little bit more about the internet back then, or computers, or any of the technology, they can learn how to use it to do what they want to do. So I think that's a really important thing. So at UNM, the part of the initiative we're thinking of is really, like I mentioned earlier, create a lot of communities of practice to get people to use them and then share their learning. In my own college, we have that GPT kind of explorational program, and that's the best part of it, is that people come in every other week and share, what they've tried, what are some of the things that worked, what are some of the things that didn't work, and how they can apply it in many different ways. So I think that would be the really good first step for any kind of institution, to have their instructors give them opportunities to use them and talk with each other.
Excellent. Katie, I wanted to jump over to you for this one too. I'm wondering what your perspective might be on this on the publisher side.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think here it is about getting in and playing around. So I agree with Ethan Mullick here, where he says at least 10 hours to understand what it can do. And I think I've spoken to many colleagues and academics who tried ChatGPT once or twice back in November or December and left unimpressed, thinking of it as a gimmick. And I think the first step is really to spend some time understanding what it can do. And then I think, as Leo says, it's important to understand the risks, but also to go out looking for the great examples that are emerging for use cases within education. And here, again, I'd point to some of the examples Ethan Mullick has shared on his Substack. He's got a fabulous post called Assigning AI, 7 Ways of Using AI in Class, which highlights a number of the different sort of use cases you can use and the roles that you can set. So there's a way to use AI as a mentor to provide feedback to students. You can use it as a tutor to direct instruction. There can be a coaching role where it can prompt metacognition. You can use it as a teammate to increase team performance. A student can receive explanations. There's a way to use it as a simulator. So the list kind of goes on. And as I think Leo is pointing out, it's about creating those communities of practice, sharing resources, and starting to play around yourself so you can really see all of the potential.
Mm-hmm. And Tom, anything you want to add?
It sometimes feels to me, we're talking here, if we go back sort of 30 years ago, it might be like saying, well, how are we going to use the internet in a university?
Mm-hmm.
What can the internet do? And the answer is going to end up being a version of everything a bit. And so I think it is tremendous to see the kind of experimentation, to see the doing, and to see the sharing of best practices. It seems to me there's a real, perhaps necessary tension between the kind of experimentation and the investigation, the mutual learning, and also in the longer term, the kind of building up of an evidence base. What works for different subjects? What do students really value? What do they find transformative? And I would love institutions to be tracking this data as best they can. The quant and the qual, trusting almost their students' judgment, because people are going to very strongly express, I find it super useful for this or that. I don't use it for that. This would be amazing, and so on. And gradually over time, we want to build up some notion of efficacious practices, of best practices, of dangers, of concerns. So that's going to ideally mean working with students to build up an evidence base and quite a granular understanding. I think also there's this combination of general rules and principles and codes of conduct, which can be really enabling and sort of warnings and so on, a kind of generalized induction, and subject-specific and topic-specific stuff. But it is the internet all over again in the sense that it's potentially the universal technology, the universal interface, the new status quo. And so I think being, it's the grand social science experiment or series of social science experiments. And so, as Katie and Leo again know better than me, you try and gather the evidence and ask the questions and share the practices and keep your mind open. But you're not necessarily going to resolve it down to a single theory or solution. It's got to be a living research project oriented around, certain values that you've decided are worth pursuing.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So if we want to make sure, critical thinking is present in the use of AI, kind of operationalizing critical thinking, what are some of the ways instructors can emphasize, say, analysis and evaluation when using Gen AI? And Katie and Leo, I'll just kind of direct that to both of you.
I think I can start.
Mm-hmm.
So it goes back to the human in the computer interaction, right? How can we use, let's say, prompt engineering at this point? Who
Right.
knows what's going to happen to prompt engineering in another few years? Maybe we don't even need to do that anymore. The computer can understand everything. But at this point, we still need to be able to formulate, the question, be able to articulate it, and then based on the output to kind of, adapt our prompt again, or being reflective and kind of see what it means, how is that what we want, and evaluate the validity of it, the accuracy of it. So there's a lot of ways to incorporate that into teaching and learning and teaching critical thinking. But for the slightly longer term, for education in general, is that what do people need to learn from now on? Remember, any kind of big piece of technology, come on the scene, it changes a little bit of, the learning and the skills you need for the future. With the printing press, you don't need to memorize the entire book anymore. You can, so you can use that kind of mental energy for something else, a little bit higher level of thinking. Same with the internet. You can look up information from really everywhere, but you need to apply your critical thinking skills or information literacy skill to evaluate those and then apply them. With this again, it can generate so much. We used to teach people to write to think, but do we need to write to think anymore? Is it to that skill set has become editing and evaluating more than writing itself? So there's a lot of bigger question to think about. What are some of the skill set that will be needed in the future if this can do so much for us? So that's something that's why it's necessary for a lot of people to start playing with it. People are creative, people are very innovative, and when a lot of people start playing with certain things, brilliant ideas will come out of it.
Yeah, that's excellent, Leo. Katie, I imagine as a publisher, part of that falls on you to sort of help develop those skills, I suppose, and so from an instructional point of view, I suppose.
Definitely. I
Yeah.
think publishers do have a role to play here in providing resources that help students and faculty to use the tools effectively and appropriately. And we've been already planning some really exciting publishing coming out in this area next year. So we'll have books designed both for students on how to use AI effectively in their studies to help them succeed at university. And we're planning a guide for academics on teaching using generative AI. We also already have an online course from Sage Campus, which is an introduction to artificial intelligence. And it's designed as a very first starter course for researchers who are thinking about AI in their academic work and academic writing. So I definitely think there's a role for publishers to play here in producing those resources to help students and faculty.
Mm-hmm. Tom, anything you'd like to add here?
Yeah, again, I'm nodding away.
Yeah.
I love the point that it changes really what we need to learn and how we learn. And I feel that in some ways there's a sort of move towards the meta. We're getting even more meta. And what I mean by that is that it puts a huge emphasis on the framings, on the worldviews, on the foundational assumptions, on the questions we ask, on the values we have. And it also puts a lot of pressure on us to be self-aware of our cognitive strengths and vulnerabilities as individuals and collectively, because we have systems that can endlessly supply answers and responses to our prompts, and that can to some degree give us correspondences between megacorpuses of data and words and so on. And this is unbelievably powerful, but we need to be incredibly cautious about our ability to identify the biases and limitations baked into this and baked into ourselves. And so, funnily enough, I feel that for me, when I'm teaching critical thinking or working around it, it puts more and more emphasis on the very embodied kind of emotive aspects of self-examination, of communication with others, of active listening, of interrogating framings, of these real kind of human fundamentals. And of course, the one question AIs can help you explore but cannot answer is what you think, is what you believe, is what you have kind of brought with you as a person, and what you don't know and what your limitations are. It can encourage you to reflect upon these things, but the answers to that lie within you. And I really do think the idea of centering this stuff is very important, because I suppose very broadly, if everyone is becoming the user of a kind of hyper-powered system, if everyone has the potential to be the kind of instigator of an exponential quality of outputs and so on, if people have the kind of publishing and information processing capacity that only corporations had a few years ago, then the kind of self-governance, self-awareness, error-checking, insight and capacity to explore your own limitations and strengths and capacity with others becomes incredibly important, this metacognitive stuff. So I would love to see an emphasis on that and the ethics of using these systems responsibly, and of course pragmatically. I guess we also need, in an ongoing way, to be educated about what they are or aren't, that they are at the moment stochastic engines, not minds. They might become something else, they might be becoming something else. We can't afford to think magically about hyper-powered tools.
Right, exactly. So, as we're thinking a little bit more tactically in this episode, I want to sort of pull in the institutional perspective, I guess. And Leo, I'll start with you on this. How should, in your opinion, institutions support instructors and librarians with evaluating and selecting AI tools for use?
So I think we're all learning at this point. So
Hmm.
I feel like it it pays to have a lot of people to experiment and explore some of these things, and then come together to perhaps create a framework of evaluation criteria for some of these things. Um, doesn't mean we have to do it ourselves within our own institution. Other places are doing that as well, so we can all learn from each other.
Hmm.
Training is another important part. We want to make sure everybody has that kind of baseline knowledge of what these things are. I did a national survey on the AI literacy of academic library employees, basically, and every single question is below midpoint. Obviously, these are self-reporting, but at the same time, nobody thought, people don't think that they are at that level, that they feel confident in using those tools or teaching people to use those. So there's a lot of room for improvement there.
Hmm.
And I think, having trial access to some of these tools will be useful for institutions to think about. Just have people kind of have access and be exposed to some of the newer technology, some of the newer platforms, new tools, and on applying the technology on different aspects. A lot of them we see a lot of them on lit reviews and other things. So why not try them out and see what that means? And also talking and inviting experts to come to campus and talk about different aspects of AI. And there are many fantastic talks and interviews online already. So have people share them. Like I said earlier, communities of practice is a great way to get this spread, basically. So that's what we're trying to do. I think that's a good first step, because
Hmm.
I've been an administrator for a long time. No matter why we want to, get people involved, there are always some people who are not part of it, and they feel left out.
Hmm.
So why not have staff from both sides, both top down and bottom up, to get this thing, worked out?
Yeah, you raise a good point. I mean, I feel like, we've been talking a lot about sort of the faculty and student level in this conversation in terms of implementing and using AI, but you can't forget the sort of, the top level, the administration, and they need to understand it just as well as everybody else does, and learn its strengths and weaknesses as well. Katie, Tom, anything you want to add to that?
A micro point for me
Hmm.
is just that I think also people might need reassurance that they're not going to be replaced by AI.
Yes.
Of course, maybe they are. But a very pragmatic question a lot of people have is, okay, in this bold new world, what are the skills I need to have still have a job in 2 years' time? And I think the pragmatics about paying a mortgage and being able to eat probably loom very large in some people's minds. And there's a great appetite for kind of skilling up and understanding you and your career and your workflow in those kind of fairly brutally pragmatic terms.
That's true. That's a good point. Ignored at your peril, I suppose, in some cases. You just heard from author and tech philosopher Dr. Tom Chatfield, Dr. Leo Lowe, Dean and Professor of the College of University Libraries and Learning Services at the University of New Mexico, and Katie Metzler, Vice President of Books and Social Science Innovation at Sage. This series is brought to you with support from Sage. Join us next week when we discuss institutional policies that need or should be developed in the selection, use, and assessment of Gen AI, as well as the key ethical questions we're all wondering about. As always, underwriting opportunities for the Authority File podcast are directed by Choice's advertising manager, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced and edited by Choice's digital media producer, Sabrina Kofer, with support from digital media assistant Ashley Roy. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.